Good afternoon, or good morning to some of those, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome, everyone, to this month's webinar. Uh, the webinar will last approximately 45 minutes, and there is the ability to ask questions using a Q&A broadcast at the side of the screen. So if any questions do come up during the presentation, please just put them on there and we will answer them at the end of it. The topic for our webinar is the CATI efficiencies. So we're looking at how to best use Nebu's CATI system to benefit most of your your efficiencies, how you can make the most benefit out of using our software, interacting with your agents, with perhaps dialer operations you have there, and how to run through different samplings so that you can make the most productivity gains possible. So the topics we're going to look at is some of these sort of sample automation and cleaning, preparing your sample ready for use so that you minimize the amount of impact that has on your calling your agents. We're looking at some of the features in the scripting side of it, how to best handle the flow of the survey to make the most contact possible. The core handling, looking at how frequent and how often you would be contacting your sample points. And then finally, the data export. And we'll be looking at how we can automate those processes and minimize the sort of the waste in running a system, running a CATI project. Looking at the sort of the sample, the import operations there as well, what we're going to be touching on is the normalization of phone numbers, removing some of the excess character sets that may be within a phone number, standardizing it for use of perhaps click-to-dial operations you may have incorporated into your system, or even using Nebu's dialer as a service. We will briefly touch on dialer as a service, but we had a webinar on that, and there's more information on our YouTube channel and on our website for that. We'll also look at assigning time groups and what time groups are, so you can best utilize when to call people. Touch on the auto matching of time zones that's built into the system, so you will automatically assign time zones according to where your sample is, and the deduplication properties you can run through the system in there. So when we look at the import on here as well, there's standard options that happen when you're importing your sample and how to best clean the sample ready for dialing. As I said, the normalization of the phone number. So for every file that you receive and you start matching in there, we can look at what that sort of calling default is going to be. So we set the country code. We're looking at a local area code there, which again, in this example, we've got this sort of UK up. If you were working in the US on sort of perhaps on the central time zone, you'd be looking at some of the codes there. And as your sample is imported, it will look for the area code of that sample and will automate the time zone, auto-match time zone to that. So it knows where your respondent is going to sit. And therefore, when you're making any appointments, your supervisors can see, your agents can see at what time the appointment is for the respondent, as well as for their own time period, the time zone they're interviewing in. So there could be different sort of time matches across that. Having a time group here, and in the example, we're using a 9 to 5 time group, but you can specify in time groups when that sample is available for dialing. So you may have, for different sample that you're importing, you can apply different time groups. Perhaps the sort of business hours you're looking at in certain countries, you maybe are looking at sort of an 8 till 4, an 8 till 6, maybe 9 to 5 in others. And you can apply this time group to that sample so that it's released at the optimal time for you to conduct your interviewing. This is any sample that's taken in is also applied sort of the time group, the time zones, and different auto matching on there, so the sample is released when your interviewers most need it. We also have sort of on here some extra options. The password to auto generate that in case you ever go through sort of mixed mode interviewing, you want to switch during part of your survey, and we'll show that in the scripting side of it, so that perhaps if you're online, so you're interviewing on a telephone interview and you want to then switch someone to an online survey, a web-based survey, so as not to lose that contact, that's able to do, and you're able to have a password randomly created for that respondent so they can be secure that their information isn't going to be available to others. They're not getting an open link. We also have the option here to have this batch inactive on there as well. And with that, it means that you can then load your sample and perhaps conduct some other sort of processing, other reviews on that import after it's been loaded into the system. Maybe you want to, preload it ready for use once sample has expired. So you deactivate this and can reactivate that sample at a later date. Again, making the most use of the sample you have available. So we also have sort of a deduplication area on here as well. And with the deduplication, what we're looking at is sort of a Boolean type search. You may have been provided sample that has the same phone number and sort of company name in there. Perhaps that's one of the areas you want to sort of remove or even deactivate these doubles. Now you have the option to deactivate or remove them, because obviously, if it's a centralized system for multiple branches and you go into one central system, then I'll redirect it to a branch, you want to keep that same number, even for the same company. So, maybe deactivating them gives you the option to then reactivate records later and have the sort of it flowing into your sample at different times. Removing the doubles will get rid of them. They're not available in the sample, and you don't have that ability to recontact them. But it does mean you are then also not putting sample to your agents that has already been contacted, and not therefore increasing the risk of perhaps a blacklisting request by the company because they've had several phone calls from you. So you're managing how your sample is going out, and you're not allowing the sort of agents to have sample that possibly could frustrate them because that person's already been contacted. We also have the ability within the sample to load your sample in here, to pull in that sampling information using an ETL system, extract, transform, load. So connecting to various different data sources, perhaps you have a regular delivery of a file to an FTP site or to sort of an email location. You're taking that file, extracting the sample that's available from that file, and maybe you're then looking at manipulating it, perhaps recoding some of the areas, even looking at transferring some of the code sort of text that's provided to you into a code for easier handling by the system, and then automatically loading that. So the ETL systems, they're available in the Nebu. Obviously, they're also available for sort of promoting and extracting data, so taking the data out of the system. But I'll cover that in more information when we get to the data export area. Additionally, when your sample is actually loaded in the system, we have additional sample controls called blocking reasons. Now, blocking reasons are reasons and conditions you can put onto the sample, and you can then automate the process or manually enable the interviewers, the supervisors, to open up that sample for interviewing. In the example we have here, we have a sort of a parts and a services type of area there. So perhaps customer satisfaction study that's being conducted. You have a lot of sort of areas like you've hit high quotas on your services side. Perhaps you want to interview your parts side for a while there. You're not sort of balancing out the sample, but you've got a lot of interviews in there, and they're specialists in talking to sort of those people that are supplying parts. So you want to release that. you can simply allow the supervisor, obviously with controlled access rights, the ability to enable a blocking reason or release the blocked sample into your sample flow. Obviously, it's not going to cut off an agent mid-interview, but the new sample that are coming out is only on those areas that are open. And we can have a sort of a quick look at how that works just by sort of viewing my sort of blocking conditions there. So if I just switch over, and then we can see here, so we're creating a blocking reason. In this example, I'm just going to sort of block some numbers in the sample that maybe are in Australia. So we can set whatever criteria we want. We can look at, in this example, a time zone, but we can set different statuses, different properties, different results. And as soon as it's specified here, then that information is blocked online. So looking at now scripting areas, we're going to briefly open up the RDP area and look at the sort of our scripting that Nebu conducts and some of the capabilities you have within the area there to carry out scripting to increase the flow of your survey. So in the survey we're looking at, just reopen my design on here. So we have within the survey, as our customers will be aware of, the option to at any point sort of right click and we can select telephone. The instructions to the interviewer, looking at day parts pulled out. As you'll notice here as well, the time and conversation time, how long you've taken in the survey. So we can look at the amount of time an interviewer is spending on different elements of the survey and perhaps encourage them to take more time or slow down a bit. Maybe they want to even skip sections where you can put skip logic in there based on how much time has been taken. We also have within the system now added on the ability to directly skip to an appointment. So for example, you're sort of getting onto the general switchboard, you've described what it is and you're put through to another department, you try and speak to someone there. So you've gone past that first contact screen, but now you're partway through the interview and you'd like to make an appointment if they ask for it, or perhaps try and call back again, and take an additional details so that you don't go through this main switchboard again. Rather than your interviewer as part of the survey is interrupting the process, then clicking on an appointment, you can direct them straight or immediately to an appointment specification. So they can go directly to the appointment screen from the script now. The other sort of areas you may be looking at when you're running a CATI telephone interview, and we have specific telephone action forms on here as well. You'll see a refusal part. Now, the refusal part can work in different ways. Every time that someone comes into the refusal screen, you can then route them through to this refusal part and ask additional questions about why they maybe didn't take part in the survey, what their reason was for refusing, and have a subroutine of that. The refusal part is also timed slightly differently. So when you're reviewing the timings of your interview and looking at how long they've taken to sort of work through your survey, what the average length of interview is, the refusal part is timed in a separate area there. You'll also notice we have sort of dynamic swaps. So as I mentioned earlier, looking at optimizing your contact point, if you are on the telephone, you're speaking to someone, you can have a dynamic swap at any time during the interview. If they sort of don't have any time to complete on the telephone with you, you can instantly swap into an online mode. And the sort of progression we've used in this one is that we're looking, sort of asking them permission to do so, checking the name and email address so we make sure we have a contact that we can sort of send that online link to. And then through a sort of a proceed online on here as well, we're sending them an email on there. So we sort of check a few details on there, and we have an email system you can set up to actually send in an email directly to the respondent. And in that way, whilst you're still on the phone, you can ask them to check their email, check they've got the link, and you're maintaining that contact point with them. You're ensuring that they know they've got the email, they know they can conduct that and finish that online, and you've built up that sort of time with them. Obviously, if they aren't going to sort of complete it at that time, you can also specify in your sample when you're going to call them back, and set up different rules, and monitor your sample so that, you know, even though they've been sent a direct link, you can also encourage them through an additional phone call to get back to them, try and get them to finish the survey. When they receive that link and they click on it, they go to the last question they were asked after the introduction screen. So they first get the introduction screen to tell them what the survey is about, and then skip past the questions you've already been through on the telephone to get to their last question point, and to finalize that online at their own leisure. Now, we've also improved here the sort of language areas, and I'll just briefly touch on this. There are sort of, as you can see, various different languages can be put in there. If we look at some of the languages, you'll see the display names on there, so they can choose what it is in there, the character sets they're using, and also the ability to have the text flow left to right, right to left on there. So just by checking boxes on there. And if we can add on as many different sort of languages as we want on there as well, let me just add on new ones, and you'll see that we've got various different languages in here. It's double bit character support, so it's full Unicode, and so things like the Chinese can be sort of specified in there as well, and using Chinese character sets. Now, the reason for sort of having the languages set in there as well means that when we're looking at the skills of our interviewers and the languages we have in our survey, the sample can also be assigned to a group of interviewers with those language skills automatically. But again, we'll look at that when we're looking at the core handling. Now, just switching back to my sort of presentation again, so we can get back onto that area. So we're now going to start looking at the core handling aspects of it. So what does this mean? This means that the project settings we have, how we are going to run our project, how we're going to handle the calls, and how often we're going to call people, looking at appointments. So really you want to look at how the appointments are going to be handled, how we're going to sort of maintain that contact with any respondent, and as I mentioned, the languages in the scripting, how that's going to be handled within the system to assign surveys records to certain agents that are online. Now, looking at obviously sort of the rules we want to specify for our project, we're looking at how often we wait between different calls before we retry that number. Again, this is customizable on a per project basis. So obviously you may have different rules for sort of B2B and B2C ones, and obviously depending on the length of interview, that could also influence how quickly you try other numbers, again with the sample size as well. So if we see that, you know, we get a busy line tone on there as well, we'll sort of know that someone is available, that they're in the household, and so we may wish to try that a lot quicker than those that don't answer. You can set your sort of maximum tries, and again, there's information which we'll come on to later that shows you where your disposition codes are, your outcome codes, and so you can see whether you need to have a certain amount of tries, whether it's worth minimizing those before the sample becomes sort of dead or not, or whether you want to expand that out and reset some of that sample automatically. The appointment settings, different appointments here. We have fixed and floating appointments. Obviously, if you make a fixed appointment with someone, they've given you a definitive time to call them, you want to ensure that your agent has that record available for them around that time period, so you can respect that appointment. but we also have the ability to release the appointments back into the pool so the next available agent will get that appointment and try to maximize the time that you specified to get your respondent. Your respondent's expecting the call there, so let's make the most of that and use them at that particular time. Obviously, some agents may have been ill or aren't able to sort of conduct the interviewing, and rather than having to reassign all the interviews, go through them, change that to who's available there, you can automatically have it go back to the pool and go to the first available interviewer at the time the appointment needs to be made. We have on here as well sort of the dialer modes. Now, with using a dialer, and Nebu's dialer as a service in particular, you can then specify the maximum mode to be used on a project. We'll talk about sort of the different modes there and the benefits you can get from them in a little while. But when you set a project to a maximum level, you can also then alter the workstations, the individual workstations, to work at different levels as well, perhaps a lower level. So if you have your core center with 20 or so agents, maybe more, sat in a center, they're working on a predictive mode. You can monitor, when their breaks are, when they're working for you. And then you have some home workers that are perhaps extending your capabilities. They may work at a lower level. They may need to be sort of calling at a click to call level or a preview level, so that they can see the results, they can get themselves comfortable, and maybe are less productive than the sort of guys that are working on the predictive mode, but you're giving the remote interviewer the control to them, but not affecting how you want your project to run at the most efficient way. So if we now look at some of the sort of core handling we've got on there, we've got a sort of a new appointment screen that's been set up. So we're sort of running a new appointment screen on here. This is a sort of new log on there. And when you're doing the appointments, there's a new development in there to make sure you can see what appointments you have. So just logging into a test mode now. As we run through the survey, sorry, we're not using a dialer on this one. As we run through the survey, so we're looking at sort of, the number we've got here as well, and we can start our interview. We can also see the appointments we already have for our own appointments. But as we're going through, and maybe we make an appointment in the system, we also want to see what time zones are available, how many appointments have already been made in certain time slots. So that, if we know we only have a certain limited amount of agents available, we're not going to overuse them. If we change to a different date, it will automatically update the count, the overview, to show us how many surveys again, how many appointments we have ready in those different time slots. So again, we're maximizing the amount of time we have to make our appointments. And we can therefore, make sort of different appointments. We can make sure that we've got enough people to be able to take those appointments and optimize the flow of the interview, the workflow for our interviewers and agents there as well. So now we're talking about the language control we had on there as well. Obviously, when we're loading our interviewers into our system, we can assign different language skills they may have, so that different interviewers can work on different languages. But you can also have different skill sets as well. You may have a B2B or a B2C specialization for your agent, and maybe you want to assign them according to that skill. So that can be used to maximize the impact your agents have on the type of project they're most suited to. But just looking at language at the moment, an interviewer will have a language. In the script, as we saw, we can specify the different languages that are going to be used within that project. Then within the project itself, we can customize some of the error messages. You can add new languages. You can change these sort of messages that pop up that assist the interviewer on a per project basis. So perhaps you want a different message showing on one project than others for not choosing the maximum amount in a multi-response, or not fulfilling the checking the box when it's a compulsory response on there as well. You can have a different message come up. And these can be edited as well for different languages. Nebu has 34 different languages already translated into the error messages system within the system, but obviously you can add new ones on if you're using those that aren't as frequently selectable. Then when your interviewer comes to log on into the survey itself, they can choose the interview that they're going to conduct, and the sample will automatically go to them because they're available. Any sort of language interviewer, any interviewer that's logged on and there's no language for the sample, then that sample will just sit in the pool waiting for any of those interviewers. So you've got multiple ways of controlling that sample flow coming out, making sure that your interviewer isn't spending time sort of clicking on a record and finding that it's in a language they don't understand, and so they have to put that back into the pool or assign it to someone else. It's all controlled, the flow within the system itself, to make sure that the right type of interviewer gets the right type of record for them. Now, obviously, the other ways we talked about briefly before, touched on it, is using the dialers on there. So call handling with dialer as a service. As I mentioned, we did have a webinar on this, and it's available to view on our YouTube channel, and there is information on our website about the dialer as a service from Nebu. But basically what the dialer does is enable you to optimize the dialing control you have per project to minimize that talk time, sort of wasted talk time that that your agents have, so that you're increasing the talk time per hour that they're spending with a respondent. So the different modes we're looking at, we have the sort of the standard sort of not dialer mode, a click to call. Maybe you have a sort of plug-in in the browser that enables it to dial for you on there. And that's sort of the lowest, other than manual dialing, sort of clicking the numbers themselves on that. But in a dialer, we've then got a sort of preview mode, and obviously depending on the type of survey you're working on, you may wish to show the details to the interviewer before placing the call. Just gives them a bit option to view any notes that may have been taken, but then the dialer will place the call and will record the result. So maybe if it's an engaged tone when the call is made, the dialer will automatically flag that, the record will shut down, and the next record would appear on the interviewer's screen. With the power dialing mode, this is sort of a one-to-one dialing relationship, so that when an agent becomes available at the end of an interview, the dialer will then start placing calls, and it will go through one at a time each of the sample that is appropriate for that agent, and detecting whether there is a respondent ready to take a call. So it will auto detect the answer machines, the busy tones, the fax lines or deadlines, and those sorts, and only put through a record live to the interviewer when they're ready for it and when a respondent answers. And then we have a predictive mode, which is the sort of full mode of utilizing, optimizing the amount of talk time you may be getting. As the interviewer is coming to the end of the interview, and the dialer is continuously calculating how long it is before and what question they're on before it needs to start dialing, and will also calculate how many lines it has to dial to ensure that it has a respondent at that time that the agent becomes free. So it's dialing multiple numbers, placing multiple calls and detecting them, maybe even dropping them almost instantly if a line becomes sort of answered, so it doesn't need to dial those other ones, but it's continuously adjusting on that and making sure that an agent's time between calls is minimized. And so what we then look at is the difference in sort of talk time you get across the different modes on there. So going from sort of a manual talk time of 12 minutes per hour up to the predictive, which is giving you around on average of 44 minutes. Now, obviously this can change with the type of study you're doing, and we go into more information on that in the dialer webinar itself. So but how do we know about, how to best control the interviewers with the dialing we've got, how many sort of calls to make, the maximum amount of tries, how we get that information fed in so we can then adjust our own systems to that. So we look at the interviewer statistics, our disposition results, maybe look at the sample overview in real time, and we can also monitor our interviewers. So when we're looking at the interviewer statistics, just a quick snapshot here, and obviously you can change the time period to report on, but what we're looking at is how our interviewers have worked, what their pause time are, how many calls they've made, how many completes they've made. But an interesting one is the ratio here. What we're doing is automatically calculating how efficient your interviewers are, whether they're working above average, their strike rates are above the average, or whether they're below average, and perhaps you want to then investigate further why that may be. If they've only made a few calls, then perhaps it needs time to adjust in the system for them to increase that. But it gives you the information to hand across different periods, maybe across even different jobs for the different interviewers, so you can recognize how best to place your interviewers to optimize the talk time, optimize the strike rates they have when they're conducting their surveys. On the disposition side, the results of the calls, where do we have these calls, when are we getting most of our sort of completes? If we're looking at an even spread of completes up to sort of the 4th, 5th time, then perhaps we want to increase those maximum tries. If we're getting 90% of our completes in the first call attempt, then perhaps we want to only make sort of 2 call tries and maximize our sample churn so that we can look at getting as many people and hitting as many different numbers as possible to optimize the way we're going to handle that sample and get our field work completed as much as possible. But this gives you the ability then to report back to your sample provider about how good that sample was. How, if you've got sort of several numbers in here that come back as being unusable, or we have blacklisting requests on them, and you can show that was on a sort of first or second attempt, how it impacted your productivity. You have a report back to your sample provider. You have that information to hand. And then looking in real time, you can monitor the progress of your project in real time and see exactly what's happening, how many people are actually being interviewed, how many completes you have, what the different status of your sample is. And again, you can take snapshots of this, export it to Excel, but it's giving you the hands-on information to be able to follow exactly what is happening with your project at any given time. So if we now have a sort of a quick look just at some of the sort of screen sharing on our optimization here, so you can actually monitor your agents. This is a new screen we are developing, which is all WebRTC based with a plug-in to the browser. It gives you a snapshot of your interviewer screen, and then if you wish to monitor them, you can go onto a full screen view. You can see their screen, watch how they're actually progressing through the survey, and this works with people that are working perhaps off your network at home, as well as those that are sort of in your own environment as well. So you can continuously see exactly what is happening on there. You can even, as you're sort of watching them, you can pause the screen, you can make some notes, and maybe from the message center even be able to send them those messages. So you can follow exactly what the interviewer is doing. The use of WebRTC obviously then enables it to be able to be more widespread than your own particular area network on there. So you can see how they're progressing through these particular surveys, and get an overview obviously of how they've done in their particular projects. So looking at sort of data export now, we've gone through sort of how we've managed our sample, how that's been automated into the system, how we've cleaned it, made it ready for interviewing, how our interviewers have been assigned the correct sample, the most appropriate sample to them. And obviously our fieldworks have been conducting, and we've got the information, audit trails on what is happening there. So the final part we're looking at is getting the export of data out, perhaps reporting to our client. Now, there's different types of sort of exports and schedule that you might want to run to be able to get that system out. So what you can do is look at delivering data to the client as well. So having the data sent to your client on an automated fashion. It may be that you're looking at the sample outcome. So looking at a daily overview of your disposition codes rather than going through the sort of the managed frames and seeing it in real time. You want a summary for the day exported out, and perhaps this is so that you can, again, advise your client on how you're progressing through your sample, what's happening, whether the sample's in an appropriate format for you, whether you're getting as many sort of core strike rates as was predicted on the job. You may even want to sort of export some of the interviewer statistics. And whilst we were looking at the sort of interviewer statistics in their screen in real time that shows you some of the information there, you also have the ability to have more detailed information on the export. We can look at the time that was taken to contact on the contact screen, asking whether someone's available to take that call, whether someone wants to work, sort of answer the surveys, and if you're go through several different sort of stages, maybe the first help desk and then passed on to a different department, and then you'll finally get to the person there. You want that contact time reflected in the interview, and also to be able to notice more how your actual talk time, your interview duration is. So again, you can break down the different elements on that and export those out in more detail. Or perhaps, as we have the last example, you want to supply information to an FTP site, perhaps rather than using a web service to connect to it that maybe has a sort of security implications. You want to have this automated delivery of updated data ready for a dashboard to report and update that on a regular basis. Well, built into the Nebu system, there is the scheduler on here, so you can actually edit sort of different data. You can select which records you want to send out, put a different filter on them. You can specify the time period that they were last completed on, and then you can set up a schedule for how you deliver that data. It can be sort of in every hour, days, weeks. You can specify the days the delivery has to take place, and also the time period of when that delivery has to be. So you can look at whether you're sending only between certain times or not. You can also specify whether this is a sort of continuous running export, so you continue to deliver it according to the schedule you've set up, whether this is going to be an email, so it's sent out to different people, so you're emailing it out to people, and you can put in an email address or several email addresses of users to receive this file. But as you'll notice on this one, we're using an SFTP. It can be delivered to an FTP site, open or secure, and that is both protocols of FTPS and SFTP, naming which directory it's going to go to when you're sending it to that folder. We also have the ability to add on a different date timestamp there. So you have an audit of when that information was sent out to your client, to your recipient. With that, if you're sending to FTP, it also means that you don't have the ability there, or you're avoiding the ability to overwrite your data. The file name will be different, named differently, so it doesn't replace what's in there. Now, maybe you don't want that date timestamp on there because you're delivering to a dashboard. You want it to read in the results from one file and overwrite that file. So there's different options in here to make sure that you have your data delivered in a secure format there. And again, as I mentioned earlier, there is an ETL system available as well. So you can also go through that and set up a regular delivery and carry out sort of complex manipulation of the data that's being delivered. So we've run through this sort of the progress of running a CATI job, optimizing your sample, cleaning the sample, preparing it, and having that out there. And we're now sort of open to take any questions that may be available from the audience. There is a Q&A button there that's on the side of your screen, and you are able to obviously type in your questions and we'll answer them. If perhaps you have questions that you want to email in, you can sort of contact the info@nebu.com as displayed on here, or any of your account managers or any agent that you have contact with within Nebu. One question came in on the release. Yes, some of the sort of screens we showed here today are sort of pre-releases of software. Some of them are sort of latest releases on there as well. We published out to our clients details of any new releases when they're available, and you can log on to the community area available to all clients and request an upgrade at any time. So we'll contact you and work out the best time to upgrade your system. So that means you'll get the newer features on there as well. Any other question there coming in? Yeah. Here we go. Oh yeah, ETL. Yeah. The ETL, obviously, what we do is have a consultation session with you on how you're going to prepare that, because every sort of sample file that's going to come in and the transformation process you wish to go through will be different at each stage. So again, contact Nebu. We'll be able to, our customer care team will be able to handle those types of questions, be able to optimize and set up the best way of doing that for you. Best way of transferring and automating that sort of import-export process. Okay, that seems to be all of the questions that have come up. I'd like to thank everyone for participating in this webinar. Obviously, we have multiple YouTube videos on there showing the software as well, showing other aspects of Nebu. And we will be delivering different webinars in the upcoming months. So please keep an eye out for them. And I look forward to you joining me again at another stage. Thank you again for your time. Have a good day.